Good morning. Our opening hymn is number 159 in the gray hymnal. Stand, please, if you're willing and able, and we'll go for it. Please be seated. Thank you. So this morning, I'm your worship leader, Ken Willingham, and I'd like to thank Barbara Stahura, who's also our speaker today, for selecting the two hymns. The first one was really nice. Okay, so ours is a welcoming community where we find connection and meaning, a sharing community where our joys are amplified, a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. We also welcome guests from Facebook Live and our Zoom audience. We welcome everyone regardless of race, creed, color, social level, economic status, gender identity, whom you love, all of that. None of it matters, just you're here. Our musician this morning is Bill Heminger. Yay, Bill. He goes for it every time he's here. Nancy's the in-tech person. Molly's at home. All are welcome here. Do we have any visitors this morning? We do have a visitor. And if you'd like, just stand, give us your name and where you're from. That's it, total thing, so we can greet you properly.
I'm Jill Miller. I'm from here. I know Bill from Pastor. I'm back in the area after being away for about 12 years.
That's a while. Well, thank you. Any online visitors? I see none, so that's fine. Okay, are there any church announcements this morning? Well, usually 3 or 4 people pop up. Something. Nope, nothing this morning. Oh, we do. Okay. Phew.
Good morning. I'm Tom. I just wanted to remind you all that the terms of office for officers and the board are ending in June, and we are looking for nominations for board people and some of the office people. I think the forms have yet to be created. However, if you have a piece of paper or whatever, you would just be thinking about nominating people for those offices, because it'll be June before we know it. So.
Any other church announcements?
I just wanted to remind everyone this Saturday night is game night, 6 to usually about 9 or so. So we'd love to see you there.
Okay. Oh, got one coming up.
Just a reminder, it's stewardship time. This is week 2. If you haven't gotten your pledge slip in, please do so, as we will need to work on the budget for next year, so we'll know how we can survive into the new year. Thanks.
Okay, with that, we'll do our normal get up and walk across the aisle and stand and greet and have fun. Whisper hello, and I'll hit the chime when it's time to come back to your seats. Go for it.
became a call and response. Response was feminine
Thank you, Bill. That was rather extraordinary. I certainly feel well-centered. So, I volunteered him happily. Now we just light our chalice. Love is the aspiration, the spirit that moves and inspires this faith we share. Rightly understood, love can nurture our spirits and transform the world. May the flame of this chalice honor and embody the power and the blessings, the love we need, the love we give, the love we are challenged always to remember and share. Thank you, Brian. May I have 2 volunteers for the offering, please? The offering that we take each Sunday isn't just a stale habit. It's an opportunity to recommit to this place and to this people. Our offering is an affirmation, a yes. When we give, we say yes to something we value. With our gifts, freely given, may we say yes to the values of our faith. May our offering help us practice Unitarian Universalism within and beyond our congregation as tools to empower our mission. Thank you. I have a volunteer somewhere who's going to read the story for all ages. And there she goes. Oh, the book. Details. Oh, okay. At least we have the book. Okay. Let me bring this down.
Okay,
How's that?
that's good, thanks. I am going to read to you the book called We Came to America by Faith Ringold. It has beautiful pictures, so I'm going to stand up so maybe you can actually see them. We came to America, every color, race, and religion from every country in the world. Some of us were already here before the others came. And some of us were brought in chains, losing our freedom and our names. We came to America, every color, race, and religion from every country in the world. We traveled from our birthplace by boat and by plane. Some of us came running from injustice, fear, and pain. We came to America, every color, race, and religion from every country in the world. We brought along our joyful songs, our stories, wise and true, our music colored in the air, beautiful sounds and patterns everywhere. Our joyful dance now freed our pain, gently like soothing rain. Our food, our fashion, and our art made America great. We came to America, every color, race, and religion from every country in the world. In spite of where we came from, or how or why we came, we are all Americans, just the same. And then the poem is written out. It is a poem on its own, and I think the pictures were wonderful, and I think the message is great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Great job as usual. Opening words?
Good morning. Well, as you know, our topic today is immigration. This is from a book called Questions for Ada by Ujioma Umabinyo. I think I pronounced that correctly. Here's to the security guards who maybe had a degree in another land. Here's to the manicurist who had to leave her family to come here, painting the nails, scrubbing the feet of strangers. Here's to the janitors who don't understand English, yet work hard despite it all. Here's to the fast food workers who work hard to see their family smile. Here's to the laundryman at the Marriott who told me with a sparkle in his eyes how he was an engineer in Peru. Here's to the bus driver, the Turkish Sufi who almost danced when I quoted Rumi. Here's to the harvesters who live in fear of being deported for coming here to open the road for a future generation. Here's to the taxi drivers from Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, and India who gossip among themselves. Here's to them waking up at 4 a.m., calling home to hear the voices of their loved ones. Here's to their children, to the children who despite it all become artists, writers, teachers, doctors, lawyers, activists, and rebels. Here's to international money transfer, for never forgetting home. Here's to their children who carry the heartbeats of their motherland and even in sleep, speak with pride about their fathers. Keep on.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Well, we take a few moments. So we'll go into a short meditation, or whatever you choose to do, however it is that you go within yourself and allow yourself to expand. You are energy. Your heart puts out energy to the point where it cannot even be read anymore because the machines aren't sensitive enough. And that's about 2 meters out on all directions. Allow yourself to just be within and out at the same time. When we return, we'll sing hymn number 123 from the Gray Manual. of justice, you hold me close and set me free. Spirit of light, come to me, come to me. Thank you. Barbara.
Good morning again. First of all, I want to say I've been taking allergy pills for 2 weeks. I haven't done anything, so if I have to blow my nose once or twice, that's why. So several months ago, I was listening to NPR, I think it was Fresh Air, and I heard an interview with a man named Jonathan Blitzer, and he is the author of this book, Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here, The United States, Central America, and the Making of a Crisis. And I highly recommend it. I know the Newburgh Library has it, because I asked them to order it. And I've been interested in immigration, I mean, not extensively, but somewhat, since I moved to Tucson in 1999, given that it's only about an hour from the border. And it has a long history with immigrants from Mexico and Central America. And as you know, Arizona used to be part of Mexico, and before that, part of Spain. But let me tell you a story first about a friend of mine before I go to the book. Her name is Val. She used to live very close to the border, and her home happened to be near this ancient path that immigrants have taken through the desert and into the United States over many, many years. And as more so, especially since the major border cities in the US have been more, their security has been more tightened up. So on her walks through the desert, or even near her home, she would come across frightened, desperate people, and she would help them as much as she could with water and food, and sometimes she even bandaged severely blistered feet. And it was dangerous from a legal standpoint for her to do this, but she couldn't ignore them. But never once was she frightened or threatened by them, and they were mostly men. In fact, they were grateful for her kindness and her help. And it's important to note here that every year, hundreds of migrants die in the Sonoran Desert, which can have temperatures ranging from over 120 degrees to below freezing. They might have been left behind by the smugglers, the people smugglers who brought them across the border. You know, if they were too slow or they became injured, the smugglers will leave them behind, or maybe they came across by themselves and they simply got lost. And some of the bodies are never identified, even though the authorities in Pima County do their best to do so, and it's really a tragic situation. On one of her walks in 2004, Val came across this heartbreaking sight. It was a discarded diaper bag with the clothes of the mother scattered around it. And she just really wondered who were this woman and her child and what happened to them. So she took this treasure back home. And over the years, she found many mundane items too in the desert. Children's backpacks, baby-sized sneakers, high heels even, cans of food, packets of herbs and seeds, stuffed animals, blankets, and prayer cards. She also found many personal items, and all these things are discarded along the way because people become too tired to carry them, or for whatever reason, they just leave them behind. Some of these personal items, photos, kids' schoolworks and diaries, love letters, and many exquisite heirloom bordered cloths called bordados, used to hold tortillas and other small items on the journey, and they're really works of art. Many of the women in Mexico and Central America make these. And over the years, Val, who is an artist and an art teacher, did something remarkable with all of these treasures. But that's a story in itself, and it'll have to wait for another time. So in 2018, I went back to Arizona for a little visit, and I stayed with Val, and she now lives in Tucson. At that time, there was a short-term migrant center in Tucson called Casas Alitas, and it was a former nuns' monastery, and it was used at the time for this sort of a respite place for the migrants. ICE buses would drop off migrants after they'd been processed, and they're waiting to go across the country to relatives or friends while they waited for their asylum hearings. And dozens of volunteers helped at the shelter. It was really remarkable. And there, all these people They could have decent meals, a shower, a warm bed, and be surrounded by friendly faces. It was a safe place after their journey of hundreds or more than 1,000 miles. And Val was a volunteer arts coordinator, so she created a gathering every Sunday afternoon where the kids and sometimes their parents could do something utterly normal, healing, and fun. They could color and draw, and Val told them whatever they loved or whatever was in their hearts, they could put that on paper, and they did with great enthusiasm. So I was able to go to Casa Salitas with Val on that Sunday when I was there and watch the kids draw their little hearts out. I don't know Spanish, so I often said no habla español very often, but I could tell them muy bueno very good, and I could smile at their artistic endeavors. And then their masterpieces were all hung on the wall, and they were so proud. And after undergoing many traumas in the weeks and months of their arduous journeys, they relaxed and laughed and simply enjoyed themselves, where they were welcome and they could just be little kids. And I'm telling you all of this is because I want to remind everyone that the immigrants are human beings who only want what all of us want, to live in safety and dignity and to provide for their families. So much right-wing rhetoric now paints all these illegals as evil smugglers of drugs or people or vermin or animals who are poisoning the blood of our country. But people are never illegal. The respectful term is undocumented immigrants, and they do deserve respect. And also, we tend to think these days that all migrants coming across the southern border are from Central America. And many these days are also from Venezuela and Ecuador in South America because of the extremely repressive governments and terrible economic situations. In fact, there are 195 countries on the globe, and people from 120 of them have migrated to the US across the border with Mexico over the years. That includes people from Africa, Afghanistan, Ukraine, China, India, Romania, and many more. Many are seeking asylum, but sadly our asylum system is badly broken these days. And unlike in previous times, many of the migrants now are families with children, sometimes even mothers with their children, even groups of mothers who band together with other mothers and children for safety. So let's go back to the book. Excuse me. Okay. Everyone who is gone is here. And it would take literally hours to talk about. I mean, it's a big fat book, but it would take a long time to tell you all the details. So I'm going to give you just a few highlights. And basically what I'll talk about is why the United States is in large part responsible for creating such terrible conditions that even today thousands of people are fleeing north across the border. So here's one paragraph alone that is how the US intervened in Central America prior to the 1980s. And it's just quoted directly from the book. The US was propping up a war machine in El Salvador. It had long treated the region as a geopolitical laboratory. The CIA had overthrown the Guatemalan government in 1954 at the behest of an American corporation that, among other things, wanted bigger tax breaks abroad. Honduras had come to be known in the region as the USS Honduras, a de facto American military installation. For years, the US's man in Nicaragua was a dictator. And as the saying went, in El Salvador is Spanish for Vietnam. So let's look first at El Salvador, at their terrible war. So after decades of insurrection by the peasants and the working people against the elites who had abused them for decades, by the 50s and 60s, the Salvadoran National Police, the Treasury Police, and the National Guard were being trained by American military advisors. So where have we heard that term before? Vietnam. And the US government was afraid of the spread of communism in Central America after the Cuban Revolution in 1959. So the US military advisors there were sent by the Kennedy administration, and they fully supported the massively repressive state government by training and arming it. And the advisors considered any illegal opposition to an existing government to be normal activities that would be normal here in the States as worker strikes, unionization efforts, and public demonstrations. Death squads and military units roamed the country, indiscriminately killing people. Between 1979 and 92, up to and maybe more than 100,000 people were murdered, and more than 1 million displaced out of a population of 5 million. You might remember one of the most famous murdered people was Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was gunned down while saying Mass. He was a champion of the poor and often spoke out against the repressive government. As a sidebar, there's an excellent movie from 1986 called Salvador. I don't know if any of you have seen it, with James Woods. Ken and I just got it from the library and watched it, and I think it's on Amazon Prime. But it really portrays the brutality of this war and the death squads. So in the early 1980s, many cities around the US declared themselves sanctuaries for Salvadoran refugees. In Tucson, the Southside Presbyterian Church became a well-known sanctuary for these people. It was led by the Reverend John Fife. And even today, volunteers from the area, they go out into the desert and they leave water jugs so immigrants won't die from lack of water. And there have been several high-profile cases of these, they call them Samaritans, going out and leaving water, being prosecuted simply for trying to save people from a horrible death. So in the book, the author follows a few people through their journeys from their home countries to the US to really bring home the individual stories, because we don't hear the individual stories here, we just hear about masses of migrants. So a major character in the book is Juan Ramagosa. He's a Salvadoran physician. He was planning on being a heart surgeon, and during his training, he traveled around the country to different hospitals where he could help. And he often gave medical treatment to people injured by the military or the police during protests. So he was finally arrested and accused of being a guerrilla commander, which he definitely was not. I think the soldiers saw he was wearing a certain kind of boots worn by the guerrillas. That's why they arrested him. He was jailed in terrible conditions and then tortured. Finally, his torturers deliberately shot him through his left forearm, shattering it, and the shooter told him, "This is so you will never practice medicine again." He did practice again, even though he couldn't do any surgery, and he eventually came to the US and became an advocate for people fleeing the terrors of El Salvador and elsewhere. On to Nicaragua. And you probably remember hearing about the Iran-Contra affair during the Reagan administration. I didn't really understand it, but I understand it better now after reading the book. There was a new government that came out of the Sandinista revolution there that was left-wing and Marxist. And at first it appeared that the lives of the poor would be much improved, but that hope didn't last once the Sandinista leaders began restricting certain freedoms and confiscated property. And of course, the United States saw the shift in government as a move towards that old bugaboo of communism and suspended economic aid to the country in the early 80s. Instead, the administration decided to help the Contras, the right-wing rebel group that opposed the Sandinistas. However, as time went on, the public opinion grew against this aid, as in fear of another Vietnam type of situation. So Congress passed the Boland Act to prohibit further aid to the Contras. However, in a complicated clandestine deal, the National Security Commission, with Reagan's explicit permission, began selling arms to Iran and then using the proceeds to continue funding the Contras in secret. And the Nicaraguan government had to defend itself against the Contra aggression, and this siphoned off the resources needed to fund social programs. With even further complications and extensive corruption since that time, the Nicaraguan government has become more and more authoritarian and corrupt. Thus, many people are still fleeing the country and going north. Perhaps ironically, around the same time, in 1986, Reagan signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act into law. At that time, it was the most comprehensive reform of US immigration law since 1952, but it no longer exists. Now to Honduras. And just a few small details of a horrific story. In late 1998, Hurricane Mitch hit this tiny nation, which was already the poorest country in the region. 11,000 were confirmed dead and almost as many were missing. 1/5 of the people lost their homes and 70% of the country's crops were destroyed. Hurricane Mitch was the deadliest natural disaster to hit Honduras in more than a century. Well, during the height of the Cold War, the US had sent more than $2 billion in aid to the country, and that was during the 1980s. Most of the money went directly to the military and its business holdings. but by the 1990s, the US had stopped the flow of money. So when Mitch hit with a destructive punch of close to $6 billion, Honduras had no means to rebuild. The situation there is still unlivable in many areas, with gangs and cartels indiscriminately kidnapping, raping, and killing people. The economy is still on life support. There was a coup in 2009, which left the country even more destabilized. And finally, to Guatemala. And I just read about this in a CNN news story. A former head of Guatemala's army is currently on trial for a murder during that country's 36-year-long civil war, which was 1960 to 1996, which led to the death of more than 200,000 people, 83% of whom were indigenous Maya. This long war was waged by a series of US-backed military governments who cracked down on leftist rebels across the country. And I mentioned this briefly earlier. The CIA helped overthrow the democratically elected president in 1954, who supported land reform that would have benefited the indigenous peasants. Of course, we know we can't have that. That's communism. So I could continue for hours with more information from this. It's an excellent book, but you probably have the idea. Of course, something positive has to be done at our southern border because the region's resources are stretched very, very thin in many places. The issue of immigration has been a political football for decades now, with each side, Republican and Democrat, contributing to the problem and then blaming the other for not solving it. And please note that the most recent denial of a bipartisan reform bill just came in the House of Representatives a month or two ago. But the US has always been a nation of immigrants from all over the globe, and they have done much of the hard work to build this country and keep it running. We cannot survive without new immigrants. 3 million immigrants, documented and not, work in our agriculture and food producing system, often terribly exploited in many ways. And Republicans in the race for Indiana governor and elsewhere say they will, quote, deport the illegals. But perhaps they don't realize we would have very little food on our tables without their hard labor. There used to be a guest worker program whereby people from the South could come across the border to work in fields and then go back home when the season ended and come back again next year, but that program no longer exists. I had a good friend in Tucson named Penny Porter, and probably in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, she and her husband had a ranch in Arizona, and they used this guest worker program, although back then they called the people wetbacks for coming across the Rio Grande. But she said it was an excellent program that people could come and work during the correct season, go back home, take their money with them and help their families, and then come back again the next season. But like I said, that doesn't happen anymore. Please recall also that the 6 men who died when the bridge near Baltimore collapsed recently, you've all heard about that, they were from Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador, all trying to make better lives for their families. And please know that many immigrants will be involved in the rebuilding as well whenever that happens. So our economy is roaring, quote, according to Washington Post and the New York Times, and immigration is a key reason. Migrants typically take hard, low-paying jobs that native-born citizens don't want. From 2005 to 2019, immigrants contributed an estimated net $37.5 billion to our economy. Now, of course, they also cost state and local governments money, and that amount in that same time period amounted to about $21.4 billion, usually for public education, food assistance, and housing assistance. But listen to this. This is a 2017 report from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. They found that immigration has an overall positive impact on the long-run economic growth in the US, and how that breaks down is important. First-generation immigrants cost the government more than native-born Americans, according to the report, about $1,600 per person annually. But second-generation immigrants are among the strongest fiscal and economic contributors in the United States, according to the report. They contribute about $1,700 per person per year. All other native-born Americans, including third-generation immigrants, contribute $1,300 per year on average. It is difficult to determine the exact cost or contribution of unauthorized immigrants because they're harder to survey. but the study suggests they likely have a more positive effect than their legal counterparts because they are on average younger and do not qualify for public benefits. And it's also important to know that less educated immigrants tend to work more than people with the same level of education born in the United States. About half of all US-born Americans with no high school diploma work, compared to about 70% of immigrants with the same education level. In general, more people working means more taxes, and that's true overall with undocumented immigrants as well. Undocumented immigrants pay an estimated $11.6 billion a year in taxes, according to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. So much for that report. So, I know there's a lot of disagreement about what can be done about the border and the many thousands of people who are fleeing north for a better life. And if you can, I urge you to read this book, or at least keep a more open mind to the US role in this traumatic situation. And once you learn these facts, it's not hard to understand how the US is paying a price for its often terrible and misguided and even corrupt involvement in Central America. But the people who live there are paying an even larger, more terrible price. Thank you. Any comments or thoughts?
I'm going to try. Thank you, Barbara. That was very good and very, very important. I wouldn't be here without immigration. All my grandparents were born in Eastern Europe, in Czechoslovakia, Germany, Russia, and Poland. And they all came here. They were welcomed here. They didn't have anything with them, but they made good lives. They all moved to the Cleveland area, which is kind of where I'm from. But thank God we had open minds at that time, which of course we don't now. The other part is the Central American story, which is so important, and we need to know, we need to hear this, we need to realize what a mostly negative force our country has been in that region for a long time. I've been to El Salvador about 12 times. I used to work with a group that worked with villages down there getting water into these really poverty-stricken area, even today. And I just wanted to say one thing, I don't know if I can say this, but I wrote a piece of music. I wrote a piece of choral music based on my experiences in a village called El Mozote. And there was a big book written in 1981 by a New York Times reporter who went to that village. The village was entirely destroyed. They were just women and children there at the time. 1,000 of them were sliced up, and the whole village set on fire. And it's a beautiful village in the mountains. The team who killed them all was trained just across the border in Honduras by the United States troops. And these people were hardly communists. They were kids. They were moms and so forth. And you can go and visit that even today. I met with a survivor, a woman who had the fortune of leaving town just the day that the executioners came in. And we got to talk to her. I copied her words down, and I put them into a song, which has been sung by choirs around the state of Indiana. But it's been
Thank you, Bill. Yes. The movie Salvador that I mentioned, it's a story of a really dissolute reporter, so that's kind of an annoying part. But he ends up being involved in reporting on the terrible carnage being conducted by the military and the death squads, and there's literally hills of bodies where they're just thrown, they're just tossed. And I know the situation now is about the undocumented immigrants coming across the border. And I know that something has to be done. But, I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows what the answer is. But with all the political division and everything unpleasant that's going on right now, we have to remember that they're people. We can't take all of them. It's not possible, but we can do more and we could do better. We could fix the asylum system, which now is pretty broken. There's very few asylum courts and asylum judges. They could fix that. A lot of the people coming across the border fleeing these countries are seeking asylum. It's an international right, I believe, to seek asylum in another country, and the United States has that guideline, that rule. And just the way that these people are being demonized, many of them are families. You know, you wouldn't pick up your little kids and traipse hundreds or 1,000 miles across horrible conditions just because you felt like it, because you wanted a vacation in America. They're desperate. So I just keep that in mind when you think of this. Yes, ma'am.
Barbara, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
These are very disturbing conversations to me. You'd be very proud of me. I spent 3 hours last night talking to someone who's very politically astute. I am not. Oh, yeah, sure. And we unwrapped the system so that I could understand all the pieces that go into decisions on these levels of government, okay? I don't have that education. So after 3 hours of going through everything and how the houses work and the House of Representatives and Congress and the Senate and the voting stuff that, and I don't have the right words, I'm sorry, but the voting, you know, each state, this is a red state. So what's going to happen is we're going to get a red vote. Doesn't matter how many Democrats vote, it's a red state. So it's moot. So after all of that and all of this, and reading the things that you send me, here's the conclusion that I've come to. It doesn't matter what we do. We cannot fix the pieces from inside a broken system, and the system is broken to its core. It is corrupt. And that's devastating to me, so I don't participate. It just feels moot. And to me, it feels like the only thing that we can really do is live our lives in the genuine, authentic, contributory way that's right for us. Because these fights are futile. How long has this been going on with Russia and and Israel and Gaza? And people want to blame one or the other. And as far as I'm concerned, you don't negotiate with terrorists, period. It's a bottom line. There is no compromise. So I don't see another way. And I think it's a great fight. And for those of you who want to fight it and use your energy, but for me, it's really traumatic. And I don't go there. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Marian. I'm gonna keep hoping that change happens. We look back to the 60s and 70s, even under Obama when things were more open. So things have swung back in the other direction to the right. And they can swing back again. And Marian, I thank you. Thank you for that and all your research. I, for one, will keep voting because I'm not going to give up. Things can change. When I was growing up in Indiana, it used to be a blue state. And now it's swung more to the red because of gerrymandering and all kinds of stuff. But it doesn't mean it's going to stay that way always. So I'll keep voting. In fact, we're going to be poll workers again May 7th because that's our way to contribute. It's a long day, but we feel like it's worth it. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
A few months ago, they hired a guy to help me out in the warehouse, and he's from El Salvador. And so I was thrilled to get to know him. I love meeting people from other countries because I just love other cultures and picking their brains and stuff like that. And I asked him, after we got to really know each other and become friends, I asked him finally, why did you leave your country? He says, corruption, basically. And I don't think he knew that word. His English is very broken, so they're not very good. So we kind of have a hard time communicating, but it was enough to understand what he was saying. And I asked him what he did for a living. And you guys have all seen CSI type shows, right? And what he did for a living in El Salvador is when the police had a crime scene, they would put their caution or do not enter tape, and he would guard that criminal area so to keep all the evidence clean, right? Now, that's a cool job. And I thought, man, he went from that to working in a warehouse, you know, and how many people have we known that went from, like, in my country, I was a brain surgeon, now I'm mopping a floor or something like that, just because of whatever reason, several different reasons. But I do believe in voting, but I also believe in when you meet somebody from a different country, reach out to them, because it's just important for them, because I don't know how much racism and stuff, crap they got to put up with to live in this country. I try to be as nice as possible. There was a Russian truck driver that came to our warehouse, and he had a really thick accent, so finally I asked him, I hate asking where you're from, 'cause I don't know if they take that wrong, I don't know. Sometimes I ask them, how many languages can you speak? Because most people outside of America can speak at least 2 languages, right? So I asked him, where are you from? And he goes, Russia. I'm about to leave, and I go, das Vidanya. It's about the only Russian I know, you know, and he's like, he got a big grin on his face. He went, das Vidanya, like that. And it was just so cool that, you know, if you just learn some simple hello and goodbye stuff in different languages of people you bump into from time to time, they really appreciate it. They love it. I mean, they have a hard time with English. English is like either the first or second hardest language to learn in the world. So when you speak their language, they just think that's so respectful and cool. So I encourage you just to learn a couple hello and goodbyes in different languages just to put a smile on their face. That's all.
Muy bueno, Omar.
Just a couple of quick things. First of all, again, Barbara, thank you so much for such a rich and thoughtful presentation. And I especially appreciate your encouragement that we don't let it be a political blame problem, but a problem to be solved that everyone could get with, so we don't do this football thing, like you said. That's one of the sick strategies that parties play, I think, is to keep a problem alive so you can blame each other and hopefully get people out to vote. But I just wanted to share this with you real quickly. This morning, when I got my coffee, I'd go to the Honeymoon Cafe on Weinbach, and I got it early enough that I could, and it's a pretty day, so I was sitting, they have some Adirondack chairs out in front, and I was sitting there watching the sky and the clouds. And while I was there, sitting there, before I came here, a couple came by down the street, and I'm really not spying, but I couldn't help it over here, and they were speaking Spanish. And both coming in, and then they got their coffee and came out. A minute later, or a few minutes later, another couple came by, and they were speaking either Russian or Ukraine. I'm not sure which, but it was some, and I just thought, friends and neighbors, the world is here.
Yep.
It was really neat.
Well, the Festival of Nations that Sharon talked about, there are, I read the little description of it. There are at least 1,500 people in our community here, and they speak 40 different languages. And years ago, when I was still doing the journaling, I did a journaling group at a class of ESL students at Harrison High, English as a second language. And, you know, they wanted to know if they had to write in English or their own language. I said, write in whatever's comfortable. And those kids loved it. They're all trying very hard to, maybe they were going to be citizens, maybe they were already citizens, I don't know, but I just love the diversity. It'd be pretty boring if it was all just like old white people in this country. You know, from the Midwest, we need that diversity to keep our economy strong and thriving, and our cultural life too, and our restaurants and everything else.
You had mentioned, I'm Jennifer, you had mentioned that there was a bipartisan immigration bill that failed.
Right.
And it failed because one political person didn't want the other political person to get credit for having a
Right.
bipartisan political bill to pass on immigration. because once they potentially won office, they wanted to have a bill and get credit for it, which is all ego instead of being a problem-solving person and just getting the problem solved after 2 years of people working on this bill. So that was crazy. But the second thing is, this is the southern border. We don't have this issue on the northern border. And it's white supremacy. They don't want a lot of brown people coming in and polluting our population. That's my opinion.
I think that's part of what's called the replacement theory. By 2050, there will be more brown people than white people, people of color than white people in this country, and some people are terrified of that. Doesn't make any sense to me, but
Most of you here know a little bit about me, know who I am. Yeah, I'm a nutcase in itself. But for me, I can identify with those in the world who have never really been very much of anywhere. I grew up as a kid in a town of 70 people. As far as I knew, everyone that spoke Spanish was an extension of Mexico. I'd been to Mexico a couple times and partied when I was in Tucson. You know, you'd drive down to cheap beer. At the time, you had to make sure you left your windows rolled up if you went south of the border, because the street kids would blow pot through your window and then turn you in, and they get a reward when you went across the border and had little leaves of pot in your car. But that was the early 70s. And, you know, everything to me, Spanish speaking, was that part of Mexico. Since then, I've lived part of my life in other parts of the world, and I became quite fascinated that the first radio keratotomy was done in Bogota. After I finished a job, took almost 2 years in Colombia. I hired a driver. The driver plus his car, all expenses paid, at that time was $100 a day, which was, I thought, you know, that's okay. This guy he had a degree in psychology and he had an MBA. He was driving me around in his car for $100 a day. Very educated people. Education and the ability to work and the intent to work is not what holds them back. They live in a caste system that's ancient, and it's still very much there. But I appreciate people that come here for a different life. And like you said, Mark, I always, even though it may embarrass some people at the table, I always try to, you know, engage them with my horrible Spanglish.
I just want to say too, a lot of people coming from the south, below the United States, they don't necessarily speak Spanish. There's many dialects, there's indigenous languages, so we tend to think of everybody as just speaking Spanish, but that's not. Right, yeah, right. But I'm thinking like Central America, South America, there's a lot of indigenous languages too. Are there any comments online?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. She really does her research on these things too. I hear about it usually as it's going on, but just tidbits. She likes to sneak it up on me. Does a good job too. And she's not here today. She's at her. Barbara, who is it that's celebrating her mother?
That's Annie, and there is on the window that goes to the office, on the outside of it, there's a paper that has a.
It was yesterday and today, as I recall. So our closing hymn is number 1064, one of your favorites, Blue Boat Home. In the teal hymnal, please stand if you're willing and able. Feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my dry heart can say, I've been sailing all my life. Never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. On my and moon my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting peace into the deep, drifting here, my ship's companions, all the kindred pilgrim souls, making our way with the light of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, reading the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe, the ocean I travel, the earth is my blue boat home. Thank you, Bill. Time to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth. Our hearts until we are together again. Barbara will come up and do the blue boats home, or do closing words.
Leviticus chapter 19, verse 30, 34. And if a man from another country is living in your land with you, do not make life hard for him. Let him be to you as one of your countrymen, and have love for him as for yourself.
Go in peace and light. May your being bless the world.